Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Today, I'm with the founder of Vanishing Seattle. And basically, they just highlight businesses that are staying open in Seattle through different generations versus other businesses that have closed due to gentrification or just being pushed out or whatever. And I would like to, before we get into the meat of Vanishing Seattle, I'd like the audience to understand who you are, Cynthia Brothers. And first off, are you originally from Seattle?
I am, yeah. Born and raised in Seattle for the most part.
There we go. So I'm guessing that's why you created Vanishing Seattle, if you have that true connection to being part of the ecosystem of Seattle versus, I guess if you're a transplant, you could still have the same sort of love for Seattle in some way? Or?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. I'm sure being born and raised here had a big influence on me and just my love for the city. I think the other big factor was just the rapid pace of change and just how much I've seen things change and the ways in which they're changing. That kind of, I think, motivated me to focus on the vanishing aspect of Seattle. But as you said, some not vanishing stuff too.
So what part of Seattle did you grow up in?
North Aurora, North Green Lake area.
Okay, There we go. That's where this third wheel started in Green Lake. So
cool.
I kind of know the area.
Oh, right on.
It was interesting. I was talking to my friends about this. I realized I never thought about the walkability of a certain town or city or the importance of knowing the local store owner or the local open mics and how that brings community together. So even you, as soon as we got in here, you're like, oh, I know someone that you might like to meet. I do that as well, but it's really come from me going out of my way to meet people versus being like, how can I join a community and then gain that network? It's versus me just handpicking people. So what is the importance of growing up in a city where it's walkable and the people's running routes and people's the local coffee shops and just the local ecosystem?
Well, I think for me, the whole point of being in a city is having these kind of cultural touchstones and gathering places. And, feeling like you're part of a community and a neighborhood and that you know people and you have these relationships and social capital. So, I feel lucky growing up here where I feel like there was always a lot happening. And I also ended up going to schools all over the city too, the CD, the South End, Fremont. And I think being exposed to a lot of different places, a lot of different cultures, music and arts venues, and people that, leave a really lasting impact. And some of those people are still around. It still feels like the town in some ways. There's still one degree of separation, for folks that are here, still here. So for me, that's kind of everything. And I think that's kind of the root at what I'm interested in with my work with Vanishing Seattle is what is the relationship between places and people and how places shape us and what does it mean to live in a city that is a community, or is it just an accumulation of buildings and structures that are housing commerce?
Has social currency changed over the years in Seattle or just in everyday lives as technology increases? Does social currency, is that more something that's online with followers versus social currency of knowing people in your town or city?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, I think technology has changed so much the way people communicate and relate to each other in some ways. I started Vanishing Seattle as primarily through social media, on Instagram and Facebook. Not necessarily because I know how to use those things super well, but I was, just kind of what was available to me. And then, got a pretty, big following organically and then expanded to film, also looking at audio and just kind of different ways to basically reach people and tell stories. I still believe, though, that it's like the in real life component that is really important, and kind of like where the meat is at, and kind of how do you translate what people communicate and consume and share online into offline and into in real life. Like, how do you get people to care and take action? How does it kind of change their hearts and minds? So I think at the end of the day, like, technology can be a good tool, but I think people really need these physical spaces to connect and gather and relate and to build. And I think there's some interesting ways in which they can kind of work together and complement each other too.
Right. How do you get people to care from your experience so far?
I think it kind of comes down to sharing stories. I think I try and just share like why a lot of these places matter, or why it mattered to other people, where are people going to go after these places are pushed out or gone. So I think there's like some emotion in it, and people have to feel a little bit of like a personal stake or some ownership, or maybe be like invited in to like the story or community that we're trying to share.
Do you think for Vanishing Seattle, I guess it's different from like, even when I'm thinking of getting, me and my friend Carter have been putting events together to like highlight artists. Our next one's on March 31st, and literally one of my guests from Canada is coming down to perform. And we're figuring out ways how to get people who don't really, no offense to artists or everyday people in Seattle, it seems like it's hard to get people to care about local arts in Seattle. So on top of that, how do you get the everyday person to care about a Canadian up-and-coming artist coming to Seattle to perform, right? So it's trying to figure that out. There's different ways to make people care about certain things, but for Vanishing Seattle, do you think FOMO is a way to get people to care?
And I definitely get people who've expressed FOMO for places that they see, or that'll write about on Vanishing Seattle that they haven't been to. And it's not always a lot of times it's not people who are even from here or who've lived here for very long. There might be people who just moved here, and they're like, wow, I wish this place looks so cool. I would have been super into it. Like, I wish that it was still around for me to enjoy. So I think there is that sense of missing out, which is kind of like, for me, all of that adds up to this kind of larger question about like, well, what are we going to do about it? Like, what kind of city do we want to live in? Like, what are the things that we can do to support the places that are still here? And I think there's a cultural component too about like getting people to care about these things, getting people to care about art. And I think that is like one of these other big questions around like, what do we value? I feel like Seattle has always been very, very big on arts and culture, on music. That's been like kind of the lifeblood of the city, and in that it's attracted people to come live and create here. It's been a big economic generator. But I think as kind of we have these other industries that have come to, it feels like, dominate it sometimes.
Yeah.
The value around art and supporting artists like sometimes seems like it's that danger of receding. So how do we keep reminding people that it's like, having a really vibrant arts community is like part of being a human in my opinion, and what can we do to make sure that that's still like a big part of our identity and that we all have access to that.
Has arts always been struggling in Seattle specifically? Because like when I even think about, not saying I'm a history guy whatsoever, unfortunately I'm terrible. Fun fact, when we were doing Washington State history in like middle school, I didn't realize I was Washington State history.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely not the history guy.
That's the fault of the curriculum. And like
But like from my understanding, Seattle was like a pioneering town at one point, right? So it's always been like a business type town. So there's always businesses moving in, and now it's tech. So has arts always had to struggle with different business entities, or is that just more in our face now with tech?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at like the history of Seattle in this region, it's always been very boom and bust.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've always had kind of like the big business, whether that's like timber or like Boeing or
Mm-hmm.
tech now. Then you kind of had this other side of it where we've also had like a lot of the business was through vice, through like gambling and prostitution and box houses and, like the seedy side of Seattle, which I
Yeah.
think is a very important part to remember as part of like our history. And I don't think art and commerce are like an either or, like a mutually exclusive. I do feel like in the past, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years, it does feel like we're almost at this crisis point where it is harder to be an artist and a working artist in this town because it's so expensive. Like artists can't afford to live and create here. And just feeling like there's not a lot of support maybe coming from the city or from patrons. Like people aren't really, like there's a lot of money, but it's not necessarily flowing to the arts. And so I don't think it's like a choice that we have to make between having art and business and all these other things. But it's like if I think as a city or like city leaders or whatever put all of our eggs in one basket, we're thinking that this one industry is going to like, be the answer all of our prayers or whatever. We should be putting all our bets on that. I mean, I think it's like just like a bad idea because I think, again, we need to have like a diverse ecosystem in order to be like a healthy city.
And do you think, but tech is like a main draw for why art is struggling in Seattle right now? I don't know if main draw is the right word, but a main factor?
I mean, I think tech is a main factor in just kind of like displacement and gentrification.
Got it.
And like hypercapitalism that then trickles down and like affects so many other sectors. So yeah, I think, big tech has definitely had a huge impact here like it has in Austin or Silicon Valley, Bay Area, where you just see like a lot of folks who are not kind of partaking in like the white collar piece of that industry and that economy have to struggle more or get pushed out. And so that's social workers, nurses, teachers, activists, artists. So
was there like a golden era of art in Seattle, or are we trying to make a golden era and there's pieces from previous decades that we like?
Yeah, I don't know if there's like a golden era. I mean, I'm sure people will be like, oh, maybe it was like the 70s or the 90s or, it's like I think there's different times at which like Seattle has been put on the map when like different parts of music exploded. Like an obvious one is like, late 80s, early 90s grunge era. You also had like Ray Charles and Quincy Jones and like the Northwest Sound and like R&B and garage and stuff before that. I think that's kind of all part of the same legacy. And then you have all these clubs like going back to like 20s, 30s, 40s, like Prohibition era. So, yeah, I just think like at whatever point in time, if you're able to like sustain arts and culture in a good way, then I think that is something to try and like hold on to because we might not have any more like eras that are like bearing creativity. We might not have any more of those if like all of the cultural makers and creatives are gone.
Damn, so art could literally like vanish in Seattle.
I mean, there's been like close to a dozen arts and music venues, performance venues that have closed or are going to be closing in the next couple months, like just since the end of last year.
Due to COVID or just like tech also, or maybe a culmination of?
I think it's a lot of different factors. Like COVID obviously didn't help, but most of them I'd say have to do with just like the economic reality now and the effects of gentrification, in that a lot of it has to do with landlords jacking up the rent or wanting to sell the building to developers and get like, basically like make money off of the property. And so you see that happening in this really like hyped up way. And then you have like the Kraken punk bar that has to close down because the developers kicking them out. Or Victory Lounge, Lo-Fi, same story. So it's like this pattern that keeps repeating.
Right.
And my hope is that, you know, collectively we can be like, can we have some interventions? Like, what can be done to protect these spaces and also to create new ones? And there are some new ones that have been able to, you know, unvanish, or like new spaces that are being created. But on balance, there's been a lot more arts venues that have closed recently.
Right. So we are seeing this like gentrification like unfold in front of us. Are there any cities that you've seen gentrification already take a toll? Like, can you see like how we're seeing how you even made the documentary that might have even been like 2 to 3 years ago now, the one about Capitol Hill, and how arts is getting pushed out and is still continuously getting pushed out. But are there cities where you've seen, where you've researched, where you start to see arts being pushed out and then now it's completely pushed out?
Ooh, I mean, people point to San Francisco a lot and the Bay Area, and I feel like, yeah, even going there to visit, it's kind of like, ooh, like you can feel it, and you can feel it in your pocketbook, just like looking around and seeing what kind of, you know, businesses and establishments there are and what kind of people there are. I also used to live in New York, and I feel like living in New York kind of primed me in some ways for when I moved back to Seattle, seeing some of those same dynamics play out. So I was living in Chinatown, Manhattan for about 5 years, and just kind of seeing the impact of like global capital on this large scale that would just displace entire blocks and neighborhoods. And you have like a block of like mom and pop restaurants or bodegas, and then it becomes luxury hotels or Chase Bank or something.
Yeah.
So the displacement of businesses and of people. And yeah, I mean, I think that has a huge impact just in terms of like, again, like, is this a place that can be accessed by people of color and immigrants and artists, or is it going to be like a bunch of like bankers and developers? And you know, it's just kind of like it's like a wholesale changeover, and to the point, and I think we see this here sometimes, where you'll have like these empty storefronts where it's just like they're sitting empty. It's like a new build, and they have this new retail space that sits empty for years. So it kind of becomes like a ghost town in some ways, and you see that walking around like some of the streets in New York, and sometimes you see it here. It's like they can't, like, it's just wasted space because tenants can't afford it, or the space is not, you know, workable for businesses, etc. So yeah, I think it is something that plays out in a lot of different cities over and over, because I think there actually kind of is like a blueprint for like how this stuff happens. I don't think it's inevitable. I think it's kind of like a planned, predictable process. So it's like, again, what can we do to try and stem that?
So it comes from like talking to the right people, or throwing the right events for awareness or something, or I don't know, maybe it's also another culmination thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's
one answer.
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of different things that have to be tried or implemented, whether that's policies or whether that's, again, like coming from like a values or a cultural or like a communications perspective, or protest and organizing. I mean, yeah, I think there's like a lot of different ways in which we have to approach it in creative ways, but I think that we have the wherewithal and the resources and the creativity within our communities to do that, because some of like the most valuable assets we've created in this city, for example, like came from communities like Daybreak Star, like El Centro de la Raza. Like those are all physically occupied and now they're like arts and cultural centers. So I don't think we can necessarily wait around for, you know, elected officials or, you know, local government to like hand down these like policies or programs, because a lot of times it ends up coming from community.
Right.
Like Africa Town is one example, and then the city might pick it up or swoop in or like try and like take credit or find a way to resource it. But I think like we again have the ability to do that if we can kind of maintain hope that something can be done.
The community has to care as well.
Yeah.
That's good, because I've even noticed myself, like when I'm looking on your page, there's so many restaurants or things I've driven by that just living in Seattle I've taken for granted, and then I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like fuck, what is that place? Is it called Sabi's or something? Right down the street.
Oh, the Polish Sebi's? Yeah. The Polish place.
It's like I've driven past that so many times and haven't even thought about it. And I'm like, oh man, now it's closing. Like,
yeah, and it's interesting. Like when I was posting about that, and I'll kind of try and do some research and just like learn a bit about the space or like the history of the building, what other businesses have been there. And it's that, that building, in addition to like looking really unique because it's kind of like this castle-like weird structure, the kind of thing when you go past, you're probably like, what's the deal with that place? But it has a really interesting long backstory too, as being like other taverns and like music venues. It was like a really, really kind of significant punk and rock venue, I want to say in like the 80s or something. I think like Soundgarden played there. So it's like, and then a lot of the people in the comments will, have memories, or they'll have their stories that they'll be able to fill in the blanks, because a lot of this stuff is not documented anywhere. So that's kind of my favorite part, is like uncovering these layers and learning a lot about the city and these spaces and businesses and people just through like other people sharing what they know. So I mean, there's so much cool stuff. And so the thing that kind of like is a driving motivator for me is like, I want everybody to know about these like, cool things about these spaces. It just seems something just seems very crass to me to just like bulldoze stuff without a thought and without, again, like I don't think the city or, sometimes architects and developers that are going to be tearing a place down, and they will do a historical report.
Yeah.
There's been so many times where I've read that report and they're like, there's nothing of significance or nobody of significance that was here.
Damn.
And then I'll post about it and people will be like, oh, hold up. Like, wait a minute. Like, that was a longtime home of Frank Jenkins, who was a really influential labor organizer and like one of the first like Black longshoremen like in the city, and like opened up like the working waterfront for other workers of color. He lived in this house for 40 years. Like, how could you not mention him? And so other people will, and shout out to Black Heritage Society for that one. Other people will fill in what they know with like their knowledge that, again, is like not, a lot of times not going to be in any official documents or resources. So again, I think it's like that kind of grassroots collective story sharing that is so important, because it's like they can't say it wasn't important.
Damn. Yeah, that's true. And just like how we started, like getting people to care is super hard sometimes though. But like,
yeah,
there's so many different avenues to go about it, and then building community to get the word out, I guess. So back to childhood, how did just because you lived in Seattle growing up, how does that give you roots to want to actually care about what's going on in Seattle? Like, did you go to school for art and that made you want to get into filmmaking, or what is your backstory?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to think of like a linear pathway to like, why am I so obsessed about this stuff? Like, I'm not, you don't have a background in filmmaking. Like, shout out to my co-executive producer Martin Tran for like helping me in this whole this whole filmmaking process. And like, there's so many people that have like helped me along the way, because there's just like a million different ways to share stories. And so I really relied upon the generosity and the expertise of like so many people in community. I mean, I think it just like as you get, like when I was growing up, I feel like I had this urge to get out of Seattle because it felt kind of small, so I did that. Went and lived in New York for a few years. And then I think that kind of gave me an appreciation of how, like a greater appreciation of how special this place is. And having a little bit of, distance, I guess, from my youth or whatever, just having a bit better understanding of the impact that it had on me. And I was lucky enough to be able to, again, like feel like I was exposed to a lot of arts and cultures, and I like played in different bands. I've been a performer at different times in my life, still am. So I'm sure that had a big impact on me in ways that I'm still trying to understand. And I think that's probably part of why I take it so like personally, especially when there's these just special places for artists and performers that get priced out and kicked out. And even if maybe if I only went there a handful of times, or I don't have like a super personal connection, like I feel like that is just such an important part of the fabric of the city, and it's important to like a lot of other people.
What type of bands have you been in?
I was in a couple different like rock bands and like kind of electro, like techno pop bands.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it feels like a long time ago, but yeah, we had fun.
There we go. So what instrument did you play? Or were you a singer or?
I played the trumpet.
Okay.
Super cool. Super cool instrument to be in a punk band with.
Hell yeah.
But I basically kind of played whatever they told me to, whatever weird pawn shop instruments we picked up, and would do some vocals. I kind of played the bass, some keyboards, omnichord. Yeah.
And did you like rock or techno better?
I like all of it, just I like kind of experimental genre crossing stuff, which was some of what we did. Yeah, kind of like that electro punk thing in like the early 2000s.
Hell
I'm
yeah.
dating myself here, but
No, that's awesome. And you said you're still a performer. What do you do now?
So I've as of last summer, I've gotten back into drag performing.
Dope.
So I did it probably, I want to say like 5 or 6 years ago, a little bit, and then stopped because like a lot of my former bandmates became drag queens and drag producers, so I kind of like got dragged along into that, which is just been such an amazing experience that I'm super grateful for. And then me and my drag partner, we kind of perform as a duo. We started doing that again last summer, and got a show on Saturday, got a couple shows in April, so it's just kind of like a fun, kind of creative release.
That's awesome. I haven't had any people in drag on my show yet. I've been trying to tap into that.
Yeah,
so
there's
there we go. Now I had my first intro without even knowing. Okay, so first of all, because my audience may not be familiar with drag, can you break down what drag is?
Oh my gosh, that's like a whole nother that could be like a whole nother show. Well, okay, I'll try to like do a little bit of justice, but drag is a art form that I think is probably old as human civilization. And I think especially in like modern times is really rooted in the queer community. There's a lot of amazing drag performers in Seattle. So drag normally will be people kind of subverting and playing with gender. Mm-hmm. So you might have men who dress in drag as women and perform across the gender spectrum. You might have drag kings, people who identify as women but dress as men, and then I'll have all sorts of different characters and personas. I mean, it's just like a huge art form, just like dance, I guess would be, or music. Like there's a million different styles and ways to do it, and it's constantly, I think the boundaries are changing and being pushed. Like you have people entering into art form that maybe you wouldn't see as commonly back in the day, like myself as like a cisgender woman who's performing in drag, as I'm not even sure if I'm doing high femme or kind of ambiguous. So yeah, I feel like Seattle, again, I think because it has a very like diverse, strong LGBT community and history, I think
Yeah.
is a very fertile ground for that type of art form and expression and experimentation. So again, that's like another way in which the city has really, shaped me and like afforded me a lot of like opportunity to be able to participate in that art form. So yeah, super grateful for that.
That's awesome. I feel like, is drag scary though? Because I feel like everyone's staring at you, and then like you have to potentially dance and potentially sing. So instead of just getting on stage and doing one of them, like you're doing like potentially all three, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's been times where I just like totally forget to lip sync.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be lip syncing right now. But yeah, I mean, I think like any other, I think sometimes when I was playing a show, like with my band, for instance, I might have been more scared than if I was doing a drag show, because at least for me, and I've heard this can be true for some other performers too, it's kind of like you are in this your persona or like your drag character or whatever, and so that can kind of I don't know, maybe feel a little bit, for me it feels like a little like not quite as vulnerable, and then it kind of paradoxically can let you kind of express yourself even more, like maybe it's helping to bring out deeper truths about yourself. I don't know.
That's cool.
That's kind of like the way that I relate to it. But yeah, I definitely get nervous, and yeah, I'm sure I screw it many times, but it's all it's all in good fun. So like it's not like anybody really cares all that much.
And what's a drag partner? How does that work?
Yeah, so I think this is maybe a little unique, but a lot of drag performers kind of might just be themselves, or be like a solo performer. But I have a friend who's a drag king that we perform together. So we'll kind of do, I don't know, there's stuff where we can kind of like play off of each other, almost have like little scenes or like sketches that we set up, or like a story that we tell. So yeah, it's just like the two of us that will do different numbers, and yeah. It's a little odd, I guess, but it's fun, and I like working collaboratively, so it's makes it even more fun from my perspective.
And are people like allowed to know your stage? How does that work? Are people supposed to know your stage name and not your government name, and or supposed to know your government name and not your stage name, or how does that? Is it like Batman kind of?
Yeah, I don't really know if there's any like rules about that. I'm sure people have their own preferences, but yeah, I mean, I'm told, yeah, our drag duo is Cat House.
Hell yeah.
House, Haus. And Chico Johnson is my drag partner, and my name is Miss Kitty Franzia. But yeah, we basically just go by Cat House.
Dope. And like, how can people support drag in Seattle? Because I'm pretty sure that's a pretty big scene here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say go to drag shows, support your performers, tip your performers, and also just I would also just put in a plug for folks to pay attention to a lot of there's a lot of bills that are cropping up in places like Tennessee and Florida and Texas, but actually was just introduced here in Washington to ban drag.
Oh, I heard that's fucked up. I heard about that.
Yeah, and it's kind of packaged in like this larger anti-trans, anti-LGBT legislation, and it's really just like spreading. And yeah, I mean, it can feel like it's something that's maybe like, oh, in one of those other states, but a lot of times when like states like Tennessee or elsewhere will introduce this legislation, it's done as like a test case and like a model for it to spread. So it's like yeah, I mean, there are groups and organizations that are fighting this legislation, and some of like the I think most like fearless leaders around that are queer folks and drag performers themselves. So like Ben De La Creme, Jinx Monsoon, those are a couple local queens who've been very vocal about it. So it's like yeah, I think drag it can be really fun and entertaining. It can be tailored for like all ages and audiences, but it is also something that's very queer and has a subversive and political history, and so people want to attack it and attack the people from which it comes, the communities from which that comes. So yeah, I think another way to support is like pay attention to the politics and the legislation, because it's, is really, impacting and harming people's lives.
For sure. What are some like main venues and aren't there like drag brunches or I haven't been to a single show. I'm going to a burlesque show tomorrow.
Oh, cool.
So I really want to
nice.
get into this
Yeah.
I'm going to it's like a queer bar thing tomorrow.
Oh, the burlesque show's at Queer Bar?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's a big drag venue.
But yeah, like what are, for like people who are in Seattle, what are like maybe, I don't know, 2 to 3 popular venues that they could check out?
Well, there's Comeback. There's so many, but like Comeback and Soto is one that used to be, that's kind of like the new version of Our Place, which used to be in Capitol Hill. There's also venues that are not strictly like queer venues, but they still will do drag shows. So like Skylark in West Seattle is one. Dragster, I haven't been to that yet, but that's a new place in Fremont where Century Ballroom used to be. I think Unicorn in Capitol Hill has shows. Clock Out Lounge in Beacon Hill. I think Wild Rose will do stuff sometimes too. There's a lot. And then drag brunches I feel like has really increased in popularity. So yeah, I think there's a lot of places that have drag brunch too. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you moved back to Seattle and you saw your surroundings, and was there like something specific that you saw? Like how long were you in Seattle after moving back? Did you create Vanishing Seattle? Because the first Vanishing Seattle documentary is like 3 years ago. So
yeah, I think I launched Vanishing Seattle roughly 5 years after I moved back from New York, and I was kind of going back and forth like bi-coastal for a while. And it's not like I noticed it and was like immediately like, oh, I'm going to start this. I think it was kind of like, oh, like I've been seeing it for a while, and it seemed to be happening like at a really accelerated rate. I just been like, kind of, it was like rolling around in my head, and I was just like noticing it a lot. But there was one place that kind of prompted me to just like actually start like the physical account, and was like my very first post. And that was a Filipino restaurant called Inay's in North Beacon Hill, and they basically got priced out. And one of my friends, Atasha Manila, was also a drag performer there, and was like worked there as a server, and then also would do these like amazing shows. So I went there for their closing night, and that was also when Atasha was performing. And it was just a really powerful, moving experience. And so I took some pictures and video and kind of shared that as a way to show people like, look what a amazing, magical, like awesome place this is. And like this is like, we're losing this space that like has all these like amazing people together in one room. So that was kind of like the origin story of it, I guess, and then just kept kind of posting from there. Is it hard for you to like take a step back when you're posting, or is it pretty heavy when you're making these documentaries and posting about these certain events and places closing? Yeah, I mean, it can be, I feel like there's a certain amount of kind of compartmentalization I have to do just to like, not be like an emotional wreck all the time. Yeah. But I still care about it, obviously. And so it's like, sometimes it does really get to me, or like there are places that I loved and adored, or like basically spent years in, grew up in, that, have shown up on that Vanishing Seattle list. And there's places that I've been actively involved in like campaigns to try and save. So I think kind of the emotional labor and the emotional toll can be like a real thing. And with the pandemic, that was like, big effect there. And, just like, again, so many arts and music venues closing the past few months. I mean, I feel like it's been a hard 2023. And I get a lot of information of people like messaging me, or the businesses messaging me. And so sometimes it's like, I don't even want to open my own DMs. I'm like, oh my God, like what terrible news am I going to get today? But it's not all bad. There's some good stuff too, like new places opening
Yeah.
or places that close that are finding a way to reopen, things like that. So I try to put some not vanishing in the mix, both for like my own
Yeah.
sanity, but also, and I think it helps to kind of, make other people feel good, or it's like, here's something you can do. You can support this place that's still around, because I think people genuinely get it and they do want to help, so you don't want people, like you said, to just like lose hope and be bummed out all the time.
How did you what made you decide to make a documentary like the first one?
So it was actually Martin Tran who approached me with the idea. So we both have pretty close connections to Busch Garden in the International District. And
break down what Busch Garden is for people who don't know.
Yes. So Busch Garden was a Japanese American restaurant that was, I think, the second one to open in Washington State, and was might be some debate around this, but was, I think, one of the first, if not the first, place to have English language karaoke in the country. Opened in the 50s and has just like been, since then, just like for generations of people, been a gathering place, not just for the Japanese American community, but the building it's into has also been like a Filipino club, like a speakeasy, performance space, and especially for I want to say like folks me and Martin's age, and even like a bit older and younger, it's like a lot of people were kind of mentored there. It was a place where a lot of activists hung out. Uncle Bob Santos, who was kind of known as like the unofficial mayor of Chinatown, and he like fought for he was like really involved in the Asian American activist movement ever since like the late 60s. That was like one of his hangout spots. Mentored a lot of people there. And just like super diverse, super old Seattle.
Oh yeah.
And again, a karaoke bar where a lot of like these bonds are formed. And it was bought by a developer in 2017, I think. So word got out and there was like this panic. And so like a campaign came together to try and like figure out how to save Busch. Martin was down there getting some footage and just filming, trying to get stuff to like eventually make a film. And so he approached me about like, there's so many Busch Gardens in Seattle. Like, do you want to do like a series? And so, I was like, hell yeah, that's an awesome idea. Like, so we've been working together since, I want to say the first series came out 2020, like right before the pandemic hit, and then during the pandemic. So we've been working together since before then, and we're in production for like a second series of films now. So again, shout out to Martin for being my thought partner and my co-conspirator and all of those.
Damn. How can people support that? Because making a documentary costs money. It takes time. Like, what can people do to support that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So we're going to be doing a GoFundMe this spring or summer to help with the production of the second film series, because almost all of the money that we raise goes to the filmmakers, because we work with different filmmakers that have connections to these places or neighborhoods, these stories that they're helping to tell. So that's probably the biggest expense, and the money's all like, we just have to fundraise all of it, or folks can donate to Vanishing Seattle or to its I recently launched a Patreon, so folks can support there, because there's definitely a lot of labor that I put into not just the films but everything else.
100%.
So, yeah.
And why Vanishing Seattle? Like, what was the choice?
It was just kind of like, I don't know, just kind of spur of the moment thing. And then after I started it, I found out that there is a book called Vanishing Seattle that was published, I think, in 2006 by a local writer and historian, Clark Humphrey, who's super cool. He's written a few books. He wrote this awesome book called Loser about local music history, and like, yeah, he's really awesome. And I think he wrote for like some different local publications and stuff over the years. Yeah, so that just kind of, I don't know, just kind of stuck.
Hell yeah. So yeah, one of my final questions for you is, what does give you hope?
I would say what gives me hope is the people of Seattle. I just feel like the people of Seattle are dope. It's like so creative, so visionary, so willing to like throw down and fight for what they believe in. Like, people here just have a lot of passion, and I feel like this city has a history of protest and art and organizing and like radical politics and, you know, just doing things differently and in a really innovative way. And I think we're a very innovative city, and I think that goes way beyond the context in which we normally hear it, which is tech. I think we have innovation in the arts and policy and organizing and just how we like relate to and take care of each other. So yeah, I mean, I think as long as people still care and care about each other and can find ways to connect with and like fortify each other, like, that's what gives me hope. Because yeah, I get bummed out running this account, but the connections and the relationships I've been able to make through it, like, I think that's what really keeps me going. So yeah, at the end of the day, I think I still do have a lot of hope for Seattle, and that's kind of, yeah, a big reason why I even do this.
And that gives me hope. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Do you have any final advice for up and coming artists, creators?
I would just say, like, we need you.
Yeah.
Just like keep doing what you're doing. I'm just really grateful for yeah, I mean, it's not easy to be an artist or a creator and to like put yourself and your vision and your labor out there. But I think that's like what, you know, really makes a place like Seattle a great place to be. Mm-hmm. So I'd say just like keep doing it, and it matters. Yeah. And yeah, thank you. Like, please just keep doing what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I'm really, community is very big for me as well. Mm-hmm. It's exciting to connecting with people like Seattle Restored, Vanishing Seattle, even Dick's Drive-In to do things. Mm. It's nice to not feel like you're just trying to support people on your own, and to find other people that also have platforms and to come together, because there are so many platforms that I've seen just since the pandemic that have lost hope and have turned off their podcasts or their blogs or their social media accounts because they you know, so platforms also have to fortify each other, in my opinion.
Yes. And I would say also don't just look at like the likes and the comments and like the metrics. You know, it's like, I think that is that can be a trap, you know. Yeah. It's kind of, and it can be addicting. It's like a certain sort of currency that's like, I don't know, maybe more reflective of like the platform's goals and trying to monetize that or capitalize on it in some way.
For sure.
Than like measuring the impact that your work or your voice might have on people and its ripple effects. So yeah, I understand how being on these kind of platforms can be discouraging, but I think we have to look for a value elsewhere and in each other, and just like, you know, the value of our work outside of how people might try and only see its value as a commodity or in numbers. So yeah, I think like the work can just stand on its own and speak for itself, and there's value in creating the work, period.
100%. 100%. I agree too. Like, I could have like the biggest artists on, or I could also have people that are very local in the music scene, and I honestly feel like I get the same amount of value from each person and hearing perspectives and growing. And sometimes it's even more beneficial for me to work with these local people so I can build that local community and that web. And so yeah, you can't really always look at followers and likes and all that stuff. Yeah, because yeah, 100%. The amount of opportunities I've gotten just being personable with people and being present versus being like, oh, remember when I DM'd you or whatever, it's just, it's, yeah.
Yeah, you're human. You're not an algorithm.
Yes.
And then you're able to support people too. And I would imagine that feels good to
100%.
Do that and put other people on and also be just a part of like a web and a community and interconnected in that way. So,
yeah,
that's a value that, again, you're not going to like see on your like dashboard insights or whatever.
Right.
So
100%. And that goes for people's music as well. It takes time for people to digest it, and maybe you only have a couple of fans, but those people really enjoy your music or whatever the case is. 100%.
Yeah, and just I think if you like enjoy it,
yes,
like it's also like you're making it, hopefully, for you
yes,
and your own sustenance and joy or insight or whatever. It's like, yeah, it can be, again, very hard to be a creator and artist and get caught up in the grind or just like worrying about being able to make a living off of it. But yeah, the things that capitalism rewards, I think, can be pretty narrow.
Yeah.
So again, like finding some just value and like happiness and like that, if it's important to you, I think you've already kind of won.
Yes, 100%. And with that, what is the easiest way for people to reach you?
Yes, they can. Folks can message me on Vanishing Seattle through Instagram, Facebook, vanishingseattle@gmail.com, vanishingseattle.org. And yeah, I always encourage pictures, tips, info about what you're seeing in your neighborhood because, again, it's a collective effort. So grateful to all the people that send that stuff in and share their stories.
Hell yeah. This has been the NAST podcast with
Cynthia Brothers, Vanishing Seattle.
And we did it.